Dear friends, welcome to our reflection for the Feast of the Epiphany, and that is the celebration of the manifestation of Jesus to the Gentiles. The idea of manifestation of God or the revelation of God to man is actually not a new concept. For example, in the case of Moses, when he saw the burning bush, it was actually a theophany, a manifestation of God. And we also have other things which we can claim to be some sort of giving us a glimpse of a supreme being or a divine being. For example, in nature, you can find that the beauty of nature, its splendor, as well as its dreadful side, can give the human person a kind of sense of a power that is greater than himself. And so, manifestation of God can be in so many forms. Particularly, of course, it is not a complete manifestation as in a way of revelation, because it will come in Jesus Christ, but even before Jesus was manifested as the Son of God, the people, the human person, already have a inkling or a sense of the divine through creation, as well as through the manifestation of God in various forms like prophecies and oracles and in signs and wonders, just like what happened in the Old Testament. But the fullness of such revelation, of course, is in Jesus Christ, when the Word made flesh, when the Son of God became fully human and fully divine when the incarnation happened. Now, my dear friends, the celebration of the Feast of the Epiphany is actually part of the 12-day celebration of Christmas. Now, we have this very famous song, the 12 days of Christmas, like on the first day of Christmas, my true love gives to me, and so on and so forth, until the 12th. Because if you're going to count from December 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, January 5 is the 12th day of Christmas, but it marks the eve also of the Epiphany in the calendar, in the old calendar, when it was celebrated on January 6. So on the 12th day of Christmas, that since from December 25 to January 5, it gives us a moment, a period wherein we prolong the self-giving and the exchange of gifts, which we celebrate in the spirit of Christmas. And so we can now treat Epiphany as a part of that series of days by which we prolong the joy of Christmas. There is also another way of trying to explain why is it that December 25 is celebrated by the Catholics as the Christmas day, while for the Orthodox they celebrate it on January 6, which is the the traditional day for the celebration of the Epiphany. Well, it is because of the adjustment when the world transferred from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. So what we have now is the Gregorian calendar. But during the time when it was adjusted because of the error in the calculation of the Julian calendar, there is already a loss of about 11 days, a difference between that of the Gregorian and the Julian. So if you are going to shall we say, transfer to the use of the Gregorian calendar from the Julian calendar, you will lose 11 days. And that's the explanation now. Why is it that in some parts of the world who continues to use the Julian calendar in their liturgical activities, particularly the Orthodox, it is celebrated on January 6th, while that of the Western Christians, they celebrate it on December 25. A theological explanation of the Epiphany can also be in terms of the audience of the manifestation of the revelation of Jesus as the Word made flesh, the Son of God who became human. And for example, it said that Christmas, December 25, is the manifestation of Jesus to the chosen people, particularly to the Anawim of the Jews. So that's why in the story of Saint Luke, it showed to us that the angels singing the Gloria and telling the shepherds that the Messiah is born in Bethlehem. They are representative actually of the Anawim. But particularly, what Anawim is the Anawim of the Jews. So we can say that the Lord manifested himself first to the Jewish people, and that's December 25. Now, the celebration of the Epiphany is the manifestation of Jesus to the Gentiles as represented by the Magi. In Christmas time, the Anawim of the Jews were represented by the shepherds who first received the good news of the birth of the Messiah. While in the Epiphany, the celebration of the Epiphany, the ones who received the message of the birth of the King of the Jews, the Messiah, are of course the Gentiles. So we can say now, we can try to make a proposal now that December 25 and the Epiphany is one long celebration of how God manifested himself. First to the chosen people, the Jewish people, the Israel, the firstborn of God as a people. And the Epiphany is a celebration of the manifestation of Jesus to the peoples. So Christmas Day is the manifestation of Jesus to the people of God, and the Epiphany is the manifestation of Jesus to the peoples of God. In other words, the Gentes or the Gentiles. Now, of course, in the Christian world, in the Western world, we celebrate Christmas, December 25, as a celebration of the birth of the Lord, and we really don't make such distinctions. And traditionally, the Epiphany is celebrated, as I said, on January 6. But in the Reformation of the calendar, we usually place that on a Sunday after the Holy Family celebration. So it is of course sometimes adjusted depending on the days. So sometimes it may fall on January 6, but not so, because it has become already a movable feast that usually falls on a Sunday. So the Epiphany marks the end of the Christmas season, because by next Sunday we will already be celebrating the baptism of the Lord, which marks the shorter ordinary time for this particular cycle in the liturgical calendar. Now let us look at some of the important characters. Remember that it is only in the Gospel of Matthew that we can find the story about the Magi. You cannot find that in the Lucan Gospel, because in the Lucan Gospel, what we have there is the story of the manifestation of the good news to the shepherds of Israel there in Bethlehem. Now, who are the Magi? Well, of course, it has been a kind of a long scholarly debate, and until now there's really not much consensus about it, of who these people are and how many of them went to the manger. But what is important is that the Magi were learned men. They were the ones who tried to read the signs from creation. Maybe they are astrologers, we don't know, but we can put it that way. And besides, there is that, in the culture like 2,000 years ago and even more, there's a culture that still prevalent among the peoples, that God can manifest Himself through signs and symbols. Of course, the modern man, like us, the modern society, does not give much premium to such thinking, which I think is also a loss for us in the modern world, because we already separated now the sense of the divine from the ordinary experience of life. But for those during that time, the nature can still give for them a kind of message. So for the Magi, maybe they're astrologers, and because of the shall we say conjunction, I think, of some planets or some heavenly bodies that created a well, shall we say, out of the ordinary phenomenon of a big star. So they were interpreted it as a sign that the king is born. And so some of the scholars would tell us that the particular conjunction of the heavenly bodies is representative of the Judean king. So in other words, that star represents Judea and that of the king. So the Magi are usually also serving as a kind of ambassadors, and in some ways they are sent by their monarchs to various courts in the ancient world to, of course, negotiate and do things. And it can also tell us in some sense, why is it that the Magi went to King Herod's court? Because they might be thinking that since they saw the star of the king of Judea to be born, and so they went to the court of King Herod. It must be more probable that it is also in that place that new son might have been born. But of course, when they came there, they realized that they were mistaken, because there was no son who was born at that time. And so they asked the wise men of Jerusalem where the king will be born, and they must have looked into the book of Genesis chapter 49 verse 10, which says that the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. So because Judah is connected with Bethlehem, and so it's easy for them now to state, although not entirely certain that it was the time that the Messiah is born, but it gave them a kind of just a broad hint that it is in Bethlehem that the Messiah will be born. And so for the Magi, seeing that the stars, according to their own calculations, were signaling the birth of the Judean king, and that's the interpretation from creation. And here the wise men of Jerusalem is telling them that that which the scriptures promise will be born in Bethlehem, and so they tried to connect, and so they went to Bethlehem. Now, a very important thing to note here, number one, the Lord manifested Himself in terms of signs from creation, but the signs of creation is not enough. It's not adequate. You have to look for its deeper meaning in the scriptures. So the Magi from the east consulted the heavens, and when they saw that it marks the conjunction of the heavenly bodies signifying the birth of a new king of Judea, they followed it. So that's the sign from creation. But that is not enough. When they went to Jerusalem, they were at lost, and they could not find the newborn king. And so they have to ask people who knows about it, and they consulted the scriptures. So two things now are very important for us at this point to understand. First, God manifested Himself in signs in our daily experience, in our lives, in the events of our lives, and even in nature, which we can say as the signs of the times. But the human experience is not enough. It has to be connected with the Word of God. So that's the reason nowadays that wherein many of our postmodern philosophies would tend to separate the Word of God from the experience of the human person. But for us Christians, particularly those who believe in God, we tell ourselves and we believe that God manifested Himself in the human experience, but that is not adequate. It has to be enlightened by the Word of God. It has to merge and become enmesh. But the modern philosophy now would tend to separate this and put the human experience higher and over the Word of God. They've put too much emphasis on the subjective experience, and it seems that the human experience is enough as a guide for their life, but that is not what we believe in. Just like the Magi, when they study the stars, the creation, nature, well, it proved them to be inadequate interpretation. They have to consult the scriptures, and by consulting the scriptures, or rather by combining this, the interpretation of the star and the interpretation of the scriptures, when they combined these two, they were able to locate the Lord. So my dear friends, in our connections for our lives, yes, it's true, God manifests Himself even until now. The manifestation of God's love for us continues even in our times. Now, it is not only a fossilized event in the past, but it is also still happening in the present and will happen in the future. That God will continue to manifest Himself in the human experience, in creation, in our lives, in the way we interact with each other. But that is only partial. This human experience, these human events, these natural events have to be interpreted in the light of the Word of God. So it is the Word of God that will enlighten, that will sharpen our and give meaning to our human experience. So my dear friends, I hope that this short reflection gives you some insights in terms of how we are going to celebrate the Epiphany. So again, Merry Christmas to all, and see you again until next Sunday.